Today I'm walking down Williams Avenue in Larkspur, and I want to talk about why so many baby boomers are retiring broke, because there is this misconception from the younger generations that all the baby boomers are rich. But the reality is that only a handful of them are rich, just like only a handful of millennials, only a handful of Gen Xers and Gen Zs are rich. But the massive amount of wealth that any one generation accumulates, because the baby boomers do have more wealth than the younger generations, that comes with age. Naturally, people think that they own everything and that you'll own nothing. But I don't subscribe to that narrative. Even though the baby boomer generation has been some of the luckiest out of all generations, they still had a fair share of their challenges as well. And also, when you have it good, it causes you not to save for retirement properly and think that you're always going to have more tomorrow and that prosperity is never going to go away from you. And that's why, fast forward to 2025, about half of Americans between 55 and 64 have absolutely nothing saved for retirement. We're talking zero. And even a lot of them who did manage to save something for retirement, are barely managing to cover their basic living expenses. And so let's talk about how this actually happened to a generation that grew up in very prosperous times. Well, the first thing is retirement really didn't exist throughout most of human history. This is a very new phenomenon over the past 100 years or so. And I think it's just going to be a blip on the radar when it comes to history, because if things keep going in this direction, it's going to disappear just as fast as it came on the scene. Retirement is no longer going to be a thing for most people within the next 20 years, most likely. But prior to the concept of retirement, people just worked until they physically couldn't anymore, and then the family or their community took care of them. And the whole idea of stepping away from work and still earning an income was a complete fantasy. This is something new that we've invented. And I think many of us can agree that it's still a fantasy moving forward, given the state of the economy and how hard it is to get ahead while you actually are working today. But all that changed back in 1935 when Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. And so for the first time, ordinary workers could stop working and receive a government check. So this kind of laid the foundation for the whole notion of retirement. And so the baby boomers' parents were actually the first generation to experience some form of retirement backed by Social Security, as well as pension programs that used to largely exist that really don't anymore. And they kind of laid the groundwork for a very simple system where you worked a job your whole life, and then you pay into Social Security, you collect your pension, and then you live comfortably and happily ever after until the end. Well, that model no longer works. And you can see that was less than 100 years ago that Social Security was actually introduced back in 1935, and it's already a failed institution. By the year 2033, Social Security is only going to be able to pay 80% of the promised benefits on its current trajectory. So less than 100 years, and the system is going insolvent. And that's largely due to how it's set up, demographics, as well as the criminal institution known as the federal government that has borrowed against those Social Security funds over the years and have withdrawn money from it and have never put it back in. And another major change that has happened is that pensions have all but disappeared in 2025. Already back in the early 1960s was when pensions kind of started disappearing, because a lot of companies realized that they couldn't afford to pay guaranteed lifetime incomes for millions of retirees, especially as people began living longer and longer. In fact, pension failures is not a new concept. Back in 1963, the automaker Studebaker failed, and every worker for that company that had a promised pension lost everything. And that became a big warning moving forward that even if you have a so-called guaranteed pension in retirement, it's not guaranteed. There were some new laws made back in those days that tried to protect pensions, but they also made them more expensive to maintain. And so businesses were looking for a way out of them, and they actually found one. In 1978, a tax code change created Section 401k. And at first, it was just meant to help executives defer bonuses, but soon it became a replacement for pensions altogether. And that's why Pretty much everyone on any sort of retirement plan right now is on a 401k plan with their job. You don't have a pension in most cases. And employers absolutely love this because it shifted the responsibility away from the employer and onto the employee to save for your own retirement. It's coming out of your pocket now. Sure, they do 401k matches and they make contributions up to a certain limit, but they're certainly not giving you enough money to retire on indefinitely until you die. And this whole idea was sold as like, well, you're in control of your own future now. And that is quite literal. Like, if you don't save anything for retirement, you're not going to have a retirement. It's pretty much that simple. But baby boomers didn't have it easy the entire time throughout all of their careers, because depending on how old of a boomer you are and when you entered your career days and your working days, like for example, if you were a young adult in the late 60s or early 70s and you entered the workforce, it was kind of pretty bad timing when it comes to investing for retirement and investing for your future. Because from 1966 to 1982, the stock market was flat, and in real inflation adjusted terms, investors lost money for 16 straight years. And we know inflation was pretty bad during this time frame. And a lot of people who are entering the workforce right now could actually be facing a similar situation, starting to save for retirement today in 2025. There's a lot of parallels to what happened during that time frame compared to what we're seeing right now. Because imagine being told to save, for retirement and invest, but then watching your savings shrink for nearly 2 decades, especially when it comes to purchasing power. And this gave a lot of baby boomers the idea that investing in the stock market is not investing for your future or for retirement. It's just a fancy way of gambling. And I think that's still largely true today. Sure, have a lot of people made it work, and a lot of people have, been able to create massive amounts of wealth and create great retirements for themselves using the stock market? Absolutely. I am not denying that whatsoever. And I still think people should do it because over the long run, over a long enough period of time, the market does go up. And it's kind of like a necessary evil that you have to participate in if you want to protect some of your wealth. So this created a situation naturally where a lot of baby boomers avoided investing in the market altogether. But by the time the 1980s arrived and the market came back to life, boomers have already lost most of their valuable working years and time to invest. A lot of them had missed all the compounding years that make investing for the long term actually work out mathematically. And once 401ks fully replaced pensions, it was just kind of like a DIY method of retirement. Nobody really told you what to do or how to do it. Nobody told you how much to invest or how much to withdraw in retirement. It was all just a big mystery, and a lot of people just stayed away from it, especially after seeing the inflationary losses happen for almost 2 decades. So needless to say, the participation rate was low because it just kind of seemed like another scam, and people didn't trust the markets. The fees were also high, and withdrawals and job changes also caused people to cash out early. And every single time one of those things happens, it chips away at your ability to make it work long term. And remember, back then, there were no online calculators, there were not financial advisors, there were no YouTube tutorials, there was nothing. You just kind of had to figure it out on your own. Even today in 2025, a lot of people don't contribute to their retirement accounts because they don't understand how it works. They don't actually have the money to contribute. So fast forward to the 1990s, things started to look up again, and the stock market really started to take off, especially tech stocks back then. So a lot of skeptical boomers who sat out the 1980s entered the market by the mid-90s, only to have the dot-com crash happen in the year 2000, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. During the dot-com collapse, the NASDAQ lost nearly 80% of its value, and boomers who were nearing retirement watched their savings get cut in half, and then just as they started to recover, the 2008 financial crisis wiped them out again. So not really a great combination there. And depending on how old of a boomer you are, this could have wiped you out entirely and prevented you from being able to retire, or now you're retiring poor compared to being well off if you would have just exited a few years before. And if you're a younger boomer, you also faced layoffs. Between 2008 and 2012, it was very hard to find a job. A lot of people had to take a downgrade in pay. At least we didn't have raging inflation back then. But you're in your mid 40s at this time, and those are supposed to be your peak earning years where you're not able to actually earn a good income or invest for retirement. Even a lot of people who were investing and did a lot of things right and were able to figure out the whole 401k thing on their own still found themselves in financial trouble. And that brings us to today. By the early 2010s and all the way up to the 2020s, a lot of boomers who were officially at retirement age were forced to keep working. And now the share of Americans who are 65 and older who have remained employed has doubled since the year 1980. A lot of them now are driving for Uber or working part-time jobs just to keep some money coming in to supplement Social Security and whatever little bit they were able to save for retirement. And the thing is, once you get older and you stop working, maybe you're lucky enough to have a paid off house, but the thing is, the expenses to own that house continue to rise, the property taxes still go up, the insurance still goes up, medical costs usually shoot through the roof as well, and just the cost for any type of medical insurance or care these days is astronomical, and even more so if you have health issues or you're elderly. This whole American dream of owning your house free and clear has turned into the lifetime subscription model where you never really own your house. But I also want to go over some other things here that have kind of contributed to a lot of boomers retiring broke. Like, for example, the Social Security shortfall is a big one. Because of inflation, the amount of money that people receive from Social Security doesn't go very far anymore. Whereas 30 years ago, people who are retired and living on Social Security could actually live a pretty good life even if they didn't have anything else saved for retirement. And so a lot of boomers saw that and thought, hey, well, I can probably do the same thing. You know, when I get to retirement, even if I didn't save anything, I'll just be able to live a modest existence on Social Security, and that's just not true anymore. Also, another big one is how much has changed when it comes to owning a home. You know, housing used to build wealth, and it still has over the past few decades if you've held on to a house and if it's appreciated by a lot. But with that appreciation also comes an increase in property taxes, an increase in insurance, and these inflated home prices a lot of times have made it a liability instead of an asset for retirees. People have only a couple options when you get to that point. You can either borrow against the house in the form of a reverse mortgage, you can sell it and take the money and try to make it last throughout your retirement. And that's basically it. And of course, you're better off if you have that versus somebody who doesn't, but it's not the magic bullet. And I think the one piece of retirement that so many people underestimated who are retired today, and I'm pretty sure people out there watching this who are retired can back me up on this, is the cost of inflation. I'm sure most people never thought, 20 years ago, that they would be struggling to keep up with their cost of living because of inflation in 2025, especially in costs like housing, food, energy, and healthcare. These are the main essentials that everybody needs. And of course, those are the things that cost the most now. And unfortunately, that's something you just can't plan for. You can do your best and you can save the most that you can for retirement, but ultimately you don't know how expensive things are going to cost by the time you reach retirement age. It's just a guess. It's anybody's guess. And similarly, even if you've done everything right, we've also seen a big rise in divorce over the past 50 years. Okay, and this increase in divorce, where people have to split assets and cover all their living costs on their own, has significantly increased the amount of people that can no longer afford to be retired. A divorce can literally make or break your ability to retire one day. Sometimes you only get one shot, and that one divorce can be enough to wipe you out financially or be a big enough setback where you're done. You're not going to retire. And similarly to inflation, what a lot of people could not ever anticipate is the rising cost of medical care and health insurance. This is a huge problem right now. That's actually the number one reason why the government is shut down right now. They're fighting over whether to continue the inflated subsidies that we saw during the pandemic or not. But these premiums have absolutely skyrocketed, even if you're young and in good shape like me, guys. I pay for me and my wife, both younger and healthy, is $1,100 a month okay? And we still have a $2,500 deductible. We still have co-pays. Still can't choose to go to any doctor you want to. And by the way, I appreciate everybody who reached out to me when I made that video about different insurance options that are out there. I'm exploring all of them, so thanks for everybody who did that. A lot of boomers also face wage stagnation because ever since the dollar was taken off the gold standard back in 1971, the reality is wages have been flat when adjusted for inflation. So people haven't really been making any extra money, and it's making it very difficult for people to continue to get ahead and save and really invest for their futures since then. And that was 54 years ago, guys. So that's a long time for people to get really royally screwed by the devaluation of the dollar. A lot of baby boomers also claim that they never had the financial literacy training or ability to just learn things for free like we have on YouTube like today. We kind of covered that already, but that was 100% true. Like information was not as prevalent and as easy to access, 30 or 40 years ago like it is today. A lot of boomers were never taught how to invest or how to budget or how to manage risk when they actually are investing, which left a lot of them very vulnerable to the market downturns, and a lot of them got a lot of bad financial advice. And let's not forget, during this same time period when we went off the gold standard, there has been a huge amount of globalization and outsourcing of American jobs. This used to be the backbone of the American middle class and used to provide good enough incomes where people could work one job for their whole life and then retire and live comfortably. But those opportunities are few and far between these days and really haven't been around for quite some time now. And one thing that really goes under discussed is the amount of baby boomer parents who took out Parent Plus or co-signed student loans for their kids, which has been burdening them with later in life debt that is making it impossible to retire or to live comfortably in retirement. So what can you do to fight against all of this? Obviously, it's too late for many baby boomers, but a lot of people who are younger watching this still have time to course correct and kind of fix some of the mistakes that boomers made. Well, one of the big things that you can do is to start investing early and make it automatic. Start your 401k account as soon as you start working. Make sure you're getting the full employer match and contribute the maximum amount as possible, as early as possible, because that's going to help you take advantage of compounding interest as much as possible over the years, which should give you a big advantage. And the younger you start doing that, the bigger your retirement nest egg is going to be. Also, once you do start building that 401k, you have to make sure you don't touch it. Don't borrow against it. Don't make early withdrawals. Don't cash it out every time you change your job. Otherwise, that money is gone, and so is the compounding interest that you're supposed to be getting from it. Also, the fees matter tremendously. A 1% annual fee might sound tiny, but over decades of investing, it can erase six figures in wealth, and you should always be picking low-cost index funds when possible for your retirement accounts. Another big thing that you can do is plan for your future living expenses right now, because you can be guaranteed it's going to cost more than you think, and you need to be ready for that. So already keep in mind that your life is probably going to cost 50 to 100% more in 30 or 40 years from now than it does right now, and try to use that as an estimate of how much you might need in retirement. Also, I highly recommend working with a CPA along with a financial advisor in order to make sure you're maximizing your retirement accounts in the appropriate way, but also reducing the amount of taxes you have to pay as much as possible, because taxes are the largest expense you're going to have in your life, guys. So the more you can reduce taxes, the more you can get ahead financially, and the more money you can keep for yourself in retirement. Another thing is you need to be very strategic with your housing options as you approach retirement. A paid off home doesn't guarantee freedom if your taxes and insurance or HOA fees are out of control and eat up half your monthly budget. You need to run the math before you downsize, refinance, or relocate, or even do a reverse mortgage. You got to be very careful with your housing decision and how you decide to handle that in retirement. Another thing that's recommended is to develop some skills that you can use at any age, things that you can use your mind for and your brain that don't require you to be fit physically or be able to work a physical job. That way, in retirement, you can bring in some extra money if you need to by doing some sort of remote work job or doing something part-time at a desk or an office, something like that. So based on everything we just talked about, it's not looking good for people who want to be retired one day if you're not starting as soon as possible. Unless you get lucky and come into some big financial windfall and are able to just make it happen all of a sudden, there's a good chance it's not going to happen for people who are delaying it, they're not saving, and they're spending too much today in their main prime working years. That's why ultimately I think retirement is going to be an extinct concept for most people in the next couple of decades. It'll be interesting to see. I'm still making videos here on YouTube, which I still plan to be in 20 years from now, and see what happens. But a lot of the stuff we talked about can be avoided, guys. Learn from previous generations' mistakes. Learn from things that people didn't know about and take advantage of all the free information. I mean, this video you're watching right now is free information and pretty much just outlined the blueprint on how to be able to retire by just not doing a lot of the things that other people fell victim to in the past. That's my preferred method of teaching, is looking at things that other people did and doing the opposite. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.